welcome you on the second episode and to have this panel of experienced biotech leaders in Africa and in the diaspora. And to have you, the audience, really, thank you for making time to join us. We are going to talk about biotech. We're going to talk about Africa. We're going to talk about leadership. But by the guest list that you must have seen in the invites, I want to make a disclaimer that we might be biased towards the health applications of biotech. But nonetheless, I think all the issues and topics we're going to be addressing can be applied across board in other areas. So without much delay, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Sakra, to Mrs. Atipo, and to Dr. Ate. Dr. Sakra is sitting, I believe, in Cairo, Egypt. Dr. Ate is sitting somewhere in Mauritius, and Mrs. Atipo is sitting somewhere in Washington, D.C. So we have really a global presence, and I also believe a global audience. So welcome to you all. I will start the conversation by just asking you all, I know you've each had a very remarkable journey, and I know your bios are really impressive, but I'm really curious about what was it in the course of your career or in the course of your life? Can you think of one specific point that, or personal experience that was the turning point to make you or to set you where you are now in terms of your leadership, in terms of the sector biotech, as relates to, you know, the other options, plethora of options that could have been available to you? So I'll start with maybe Dr. Sakra. Can you tell us what was it that brought you to biotech and made you choose entrepreneurship?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope it's afternoon everywhere. We have global audience, so this might not be very correct. Thank you, Adrian, for the opportunity. Thank you, BioAfrica, for the hosting and the feature. Actually, this is a very tricky question you're starting with. If I choose one moment, I would choose the following. So I was basically an academic. I never envisioned myself as an entrepreneur with leading projects and going to the business side of things. Because when I graduated from School of Pharmacy and then I got my master's degree, I applied for a PhD degree. I had that stereotype that pharma companies are like big companies, you know, major projects. And to go there, you need a lot of investments and you need a lot of money. And then what happened is, when I applied for my PhD project, it was a joint project between the University of Geneva in Switzerland and a small company in Berlin called Capsolution. I went to the interview and then I found, of course, I checked the website. It was super awesome. I had like very high stereotype ambitions. And then I found that this Capsolution company is basically 20 people in like 3-room apartment, sort of. And the CEO is a very young guy, like 35 years old. I felt something is suspicious. And then they call themselves a startup. I don't know what is a startup. I'm coming for a pharma company. And then 3 years after that story, I felt loving the model. I spent 3 years with those guys, actually till the company crashed into the wall, like many of the startups happen. But I felt in love with the model. I felt the value. I learned that to become a biotech entrepreneur or a pharmaceutical businessman, you don't have to build the likes of Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. You can really build something small that focuses on one single problem, solve the problem, offer value to the whole value chain of the industry. And from there, you can actually bring value to your country and society. I guess this was the turning moment, because after I got my PhD, I thought, you know what? I love my experience in the company more than the university, so let's get back there. That would be my answer.
Fantastic. I love that story. Dr. Ate?
Sure. Thank you very much, Adrienne, and thank you to BioAfrica for organizing these series of conversations. I'll go a lot further back than Omar. So I'll just tell you, I actually decided to become a bioengineer at the age of 9 years old. You know, I was born in the UK. My father was studying abroad. I think he was the second aeronautical engineer to qualify for Cameroon, and he went back and worked with the airline. He married my mom, had me in England, and then we went back. I was quite ill with asthma throughout my childhood, and I was also hanging out with my dad in his hangars and seeing all these planes and taken apart. So I was, you know, sort of not able to choose between engineering and medicine. And everyone kept on asking me, what do you want to do? I want to be an engineer doctor. And that was what I said. And one day my mom came across a Time magazine, or it was Newsweek. They used to get those weekly back in the 80s in Cameroon. And, you know, she came excitedly to me and said, hey, there's an article here about this new field called bioengineering, where you're doing both medicine and engineering. And that stuck in my mind. And actually, I took it all the way through to university, PhD, postdocing at the university as a researcher, and starting up a company in the space. The business side of things was also of interest, but I developed that a bit later than that.
Yeah, the power of exposure. That's what I'm hearing from both of you. And I'm going to put my fellow co-host on the spot. Mrs. Atipo, what was it for you? I mean, your journey as well has been remarkable, but I'm curious, how did it all start?
Yeah, and very similar, I think, to blending of the two stories that we've heard from our two guests here. But for me, I think I at one point wanted to be a physician. I knew that I was really interested in medicine. And I didn't want to be an engineer because my dad was one, and that was the last thing I was ever going to do. And so similarly, when I went to college, I kind of tried to focus on that, but realized that actually there were other ways that one could get involved in making medicines, developing them, and the field of bioengineering was new. And I somehow tripped into engineering, the last thing I thought I'd want to do, but at least I got to combine it with medicine by studying biomedical engineering. So that was like the first little foray. But I would actually say the most pivotal moment for me was when I was visiting family in Benin, and had come down when I got back to Ghana with my mother, a really, really bad case of malaria. And what I realized is that channels of access were not exactly readily available in ways that one would normally think. And it wasn't just necessarily unique to the experiences that I had in Ghana, but shortly when I got back to the US, there was a situation where also challenges of access, where somebody through my network contacted me, needed access to medication, and wasn't able to get it until we were able to connect them through our channels of network. And so that really started to open up my mind to, how do we think about areas of access? How do we think about ways for which people can get the treatment they need? And I really started to push on this from a leadership standpoint within the company that I was in at the time, within Roche and Genentech, and had phenomenal opportunities there, to leadership opportunities in the startup world. So it was just something that I became super passionate about over time and grew on.
Yeah, I wasn't
I'm
planning.
going to on you.
I wasn't planning to add anything, but from your stories, I think my story is a kind of a juxtaposition of all your stories. So I started off, my mom wanted me to be a medical doctor. I kind of went along with it because I loved biology, but I also loved chemistry, and I love business. I've been doing business since I was 8. But I was always like, I didn't know quite well what I wanted to do. So I went along, tried to prepare for medical school exams after my high school. And I was visiting a family friend who was a doctor, and he was sitting in his office, and just above him, there was a portrait, kind of a picture. And that was them in the morgue doing a dissection of a cadaver in medical school. And at that moment, I decided, I'm not doing medicine. So then I started doing the wheels in my head. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Then pharmacy came along, Saka. And I was like, oh, pharmacy is a good combination of, the science, the medical science, and the business side. So I've been pursuing that, but never quite got into pharmacy school for many other reasons. But yeah, that's what put me on my path. And the part about really health, I think the malaria part, my mom was a serious malaria patient growing up, and I saw her really bit down by malaria. So I think that's where the medical mission kind of came out also. So the business was more something that just was kind of from very young. Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Delali, to kick us off in our series of discussion points.
Yes, and I believe just one of the exciting areas that we talk about, obviously, is where is biotech going, and specifically, how do we think about the opportunities within Africa for biotechnology? And the market has the chance to really go far. Now, all of that being said, when you think about the fact that you have a lot more Africans who are really demanding sophisticated healthcare services, there's obviously been increasing investment when you think about biotech and R&D, also just even the greater emphasis around security. And this is whether you're talking about food security or what we just came through with COVID. You have also, when you think about it, increasing demand for point of care diagnostics, our natural resources that can think about biofuel production. These are all the things. And of course, as this panel, we're probably, again, a little bit more biased towards the medical side, but biotechnology encompasses so much. And so to that end, we really need to think or talk about talent. How do we enable all of these areas within biotechnology? And so Dr. Atta Davidson, I would really like to actually start with you as a returning African scientist and entrepreneur. We'd love to be able to hear your experiences and insights, especially as it relates to harnessing local talent in the continent, and as well as leveraging talent across the diaspora, given the significant interest in really building out the biotech sector within Africa. So I'll start with you with that.
Sure. So first things first is I think there's a real buzz around Africa generally in the last few years, right? Whether it's Burna Boy filling up the Olympic Stadium in London, or the fintech startups doing incredibly well. You got a lot of funds developing there, and you've got unicorns coming out of that. So healthcare is next on the agenda. I looked at the figures. So about $5.4 billion or so, some say more, were invested into Africa in 2022, and only 3% of that, so about 162 million, went to healthcare, and only 0.2% of that, from my deductions, reading all the various reports, so about $10.8 million went into deep tech healthcare, so biotech and medical devices that we would think about. So we think there's a really huge opportunity here for healthcare. There's a big gap, financing gap that needs to be plugged. And of course, it's inextricably linked with talent. From my experience, so, I went to Cameroon when I was 5, went back when I was to the UK at 18 and stayed there, studied, spun out a company out of Queen Mary, University of London. And I've been doing that since. And even though I've come over to Mauritius 2 years ago, I've still been working on Biotech, which is our biotech startup. I've had the pleasure, though, to be able to interact with locals. So we actually placed some studies at a local CRO here in Mauritius, where they can do some drug discovery, drug development work. And I've been able to see that there are qualified talent. There are PhDs. There are a few institutions, even here in Mauritius. There's a biomaterials and bioscience research center, and they're producing PhDs every year. So the talent is there, but I think where we're struggling is more on the finances side, and we can get to that. I've been able to read as well a lot about other returnees, whether it's to Ghana, South Africa, etc. And the other great advantage in terms of talent that we have now is the communication platforms that are quite open. So we're able to have discussions across time zones, across continents, towns, cities, or countries, right? And when I started doing Biomoti in the UK, I was the only African biotech CEO in the country, in the whole of the UK, right? Now there are a lot more. just simply with the passage of 10, 15 years, there have been a lot more young entrepreneurs of African origin who have started companies. There are a lot more accelerators, a lot more funding opportunities for them. And a lot of these guys keep a link with the continent. And we need to exploit that. So we need to use them to, as Delali lives in Washington, but is quite plugged into the continent, for example, and has a background at big pharma, major global companies. We need to plug into those guys and get exchange of information, of knowledge, and contacts we need flowing in between.
No, excellent points, Davidson. And to that end, I'd really also love to bring in Dr. Omar as well to the conversation, especially when you're thinking about building up talent. We have a tremendous amount. How do we now also think about what it takes to continue to skill and scale and have the opportunities to actually apply what we're learning within the diaspora as well as locally?
Actually, I'd love to second Davidson on his point about, what we have witnessed hands-on, that, let's say, 50 years ago, there has been a wave traveling from Africa to the European US to get their PhDs, become scientists. Now we're witnessing a returning wave, which is very interesting. You'd see a lot of senior scientists coming back to their hometowns, either for family reasons, either they wanted just to get back home, either they wanted to pay it forward and bring some value back to their country. So we now have a good foundation of very well-trained scientists graduating from top universities across the globe, getting back to Africa. And we have to leverage that. Probably there is a gap between the graduate level and those senior scientist level. So this is something we have to work on. We have to create the environment for those scientists to really apply what they have learned, to share their experiences, impact the new generation of graduates, communicate with the graduating students, and then we can bridge that gap. So we do have still some challenges probably with young graduating talent, but I'm super happy and excited about the wave of returning scientists.
Oh, excellent. And I know, talking about the opportunities is obviously, where we want to be able to look at the glass half full. Of course, there's still some challenges, that's very well noted by both of you, that we see the folks returning, but we're still obviously also dealing with a little bit of brain drain as well, to talent that's fantastically trained within Africa, also still leaving the continent. And so that will be something that potentially, if we have time to explore later, we can. But I'll turn it over back to Adrienne to really help us talk through some of the bottlenecks that we know we do face.
Thanks to you all for setting a real positive note. I think if we look at Asia and how they've grown in the space, the likes of India, the likes of China, the diaspora has been, their kind of secret weapon in terms of leveraging and become competitive with the rest of the globe in biotech. So I like the points that you all made regarding talent locally, but also the talent, African talent that we have also in the diaspora. So yeah, and as you mentioned, despite the opportunities that you all have highlighted, we do have challenges. We have challenges ranging from infrastructure limitations. We have challenges in terms of regulatory complexities, different countries having different regulatory frameworks. We have funding constraints. Obviously, these are common problems, but in our unique setting in Africa, they kind of take another dimension to them. And you've all mentioned also, the gap in talent. There is definitely upskilling that needs to be done, and even redirecting the talent, because our universities nowadays, they still to catch up to the fact that biotech, can be a source of, strengthening our development as Africa, feeding into the GDP. So people go to school, to universities, and they're trained to, become academics. They're not really trained to, be creative, be innovative, be entrepreneurial. So I think on the talent side, to be specific to this conversation, I think that's something also that needs to be addressed. The regulatory landscape, if we can work on, harmonizing our regulatory landscape so that, someone like Omar working on his projects in Egypt can quickly scale across the continent without too much constraint on the regulatory side. If we can also look at funding, funding for biotech is a big bottleneck. It's an expensive venture. It is risky. That is known. But we need more funding that understands, that is patient, and that also supports people in the very early stages. So as we delve more into this area of challenges, I would like to turn over to Dr. Sakar. If you can maybe share your thoughts. You have now been building NAWA Scientific for the last 6 years, and you've really done great strides. You've achieved quite a bit, and we will get into some of that. But what has been your experience in terms of infrastructure challenges in Africa, and maybe particularly talking about challenges in supply chain, and how have you addressed this? How have you dealt with these challenges?
Absolutely. Yeah, just a little correction. I've been in the market for 8 years now, but yeah. That's a very interesting question. Now, yes, indeed, as you started and you set the stage correctly, that we have a lot of bright minds. So we don't have issues with the ideas. We don't have issues with the knowledge, at least relatively to those challenges you mentioned. Infrastructure is very much outdated compared to our ambitions. So as biotech leaders, as someone who wants to build, become a biotech entrepreneur, you would have two options. Either to rely on the infrastructure, and by infrastructure, I'm particularly meaning laboratories and their facilities in the surrounding universities, or you have to build your own. If you go to the university, you will find so many hurdles. Either they are outdated, very let's say busy with so many people versus available equipment. Like you have crazy queuing times to measure your samples, which was the current status in Egypt. And actually, this is what was the problem we started surveying in Egypt. Probably we get to this later. Or you have to build your own. And to build your own, you get into the problem of financing. We are speaking about millions of US dollars to build a very, let's say, decently equipped labs. This will bring you to where you get the money. You will find that investors are not there. The funding schemes are not so much understanding the value of building a scientific lab versus a medical lab. Probably if you're telling the government you're building a medical lab, you'll get more, let's say, easy financing. But you're telling them, yeah, I want to build a scientific lab because I'm doing scientific innovation. You will get like, bravo, but go away. So yes, infrastructure is very, very challenging. Supply chain is another point. Now with the whole production of, let's say, kits, consumables, spare parts, machines, being done either in Europe or the US or Far East, China and India, you have to import everything, like 100% of importation. And this makes the average time between placing an order and receiving something maybe in weeks to month time, where at the time we were in Europe, you place your order today, you get it tomorrow, and sometimes you get it in the evening. So you see, this is the difference in speed. And this sometimes can kill so many of the ideas. Adding to the fire, the continuous devaluation of African currencies. And it seems like now a pan-African thing, either in Egypt and Nigeria and so many other countries, we're losing so much of our purchase power of those supplies over time. And this is making our life much harder. Regulatory, you have pointed this very nicely. Regulatory frameworks are actually different from one country to another. This is true. I am aware that there are some government level initiatives or at least talks to solve this issue because they need at least the big pharma companies to, the local big pharma companies to expand quickly in Africa. So I hope that this will create a momentum where they create some more unified frameworks to allow even smaller biotech companies also to grow to other countries.
Mm-hmm. And just to expand a little bit on everything you've shared, Dr. Sakar, what about or how did you deal with those infrastructure challenges that you've just highlighted? I am aware that you built your own. How do you deal with this timelines? Is there anything that you're doing to kind of circumvent the delays? Because the delays is something that I'm sure anyone doing biotech, even if it's just in the academia level, has firsthand experience with.
Yeah.
But for you, I'm imagining for you, time is money. So how are you doing that?
Okay. So we chose to do things the hard way and to build our own infrastructure. And we actually built the whole business model of Nawal Scientific around that. We created what we call a cloud lab model. Basically, we wanted to serve as much, or let's say as many of scientists as we can. So cloud lab model is basically you build a mega lab in one city, and then you offer your services online and on demand through an online platform. So we created a business out of the lack of infrastructure. And now we are serving 12 countries just from a couple of labs in Egypt. Our clients would log on to our website. They place their order. Let's say I'm a biotech scientist, I'm a nanotech scientist, I have those samples and I need to do those analysis. We take you through an online shopping experience where you basically add the services to a cart, answer some questions, and then pay and go check out. We leverage the technology in the sense of our website is connected back to back with DHL. The order is placed to the courier will go to you, collect the samples, and bring it to us very quickly. We do the analysis, we send you the results back online. So here we leverage the internet, we leverage existing, let's say, big couriers that can already move samples very quickly between cities and cross-border. So this was one thing. Second, speaking about the supply chain, we had to establish hubs out of Africa so that we can channel orders very quickly to them. We have a logistic hub in Poland. So we channel the orders very quickly to Poland and then very quickly from Poland to Cairo. So you really need to think out of the box, to get things going till the typical pathways are clear. Also, one comment here is about the, I don't know if we should more discuss about the investment side now, or this is coming in a different question.
Mm-hmm. We will touch on the investment and funding challenges shortly. So, but really, thank you for that insight. I mean, talk about making lemonade out of lemons. You created a business model to solve an existing challenge and be a solution within your region. I think that's really brilliant, and some of the folks on the call can definitely think through that and how they can also leverage whatever challenges that they are facing to become the solution. So thanks so much, Dr. Sakar. I will ask Mrs. Atipo to continue the conversation.
Yes, and I think one of the things really quickly that Dr. Omar, you reminded me of is this, we're talking about the challenges, but even as folks in the audience probably have experience with, folks on the phone here, or even just thinking about ideas for the future, there's opportunities even just thinking about how do we tackle local production for consumables, for reagents, for things that we know have logistically been hard to bring in from outside of Africa, but could potentially be opportunities for local production and focusing in on some narrow sectors that way. But I really want to bring in Dr. Atta into the conversation to add his perspectives, especially as it relates around some of the regulatory challenges that you might have experienced, as well as any potential supply chain challenges or examples that you could share with the team here, and really thinking through the potential strategies to overcome those challenges too.
Sure, thanks. I really think Omar's example is perfect, and his experiences really sums up what we've seen as well. So when I got here 2 years ago, as part of doing just a small project that honestly in the UK would have taken me 2 to 3 months, I think we ended up doing it for a better part of 8 months here. Definitely order your product 6 months in advance, I think, and all the rest. There are very basic supply chain problems, dry ice, transport, going through customs, duties, ridiculous. You actually have to have an agent. As Omar said, working in the UK, you literally order your products, that afternoon, you'll have them that next morning. It totally transforms the game. Of course, I think we're working towards that, and that will only happen when we have enough of these sort of research activities or biotech startups operating that it justifies people, suppliers building that kind of infrastructure. But I really congratulate Omar on his approach to this. These problems in Africa always create opportunities. And that's how we have to look at it. From a regulatory perspective as well, obviously there are 54 countries in Africa. Some countries don't even have, most actually probably don't have a medicines regulatory agency, right? For sure, I would say most businesses, if you're developing a medicine, chances are it's not just going to be a cure for Africans, it'll be a cure for, the global population. So you'll probably be turning towards foreign regulators, the FDA, the EMEA. I know typically manufacturers on the continent have visits from those agencies, to enable them to export the medicines or sell in other jurisdictions. And I think this is something, we in Africa, we just have to leapfrog all this. We have to probably go with a regional approach, whether via the African Union. I know there's an African Medicines Agency under NEPAD that is looking at developing a framework for medicines regulation. And it's something, we really need to hurry up about. But if there are other, things that are probably adjacent to regulatory, like an ethics committee. We as part of our work, we were looking into collecting human blood, right? Just to isolate immune cells from that. So NK cells and T cells, to do some studies. Now, again, in the UK, I would have just gone to the blood bank. There'll be some pre-existing ethics in place, allowing you, so they often discard blood that is not used. You could collect that, spin out whatever you need, and very quickly do your experiments. When we broached the subject with the authorities here, it was a head-scratching exercise and not knowing who should talk to who, and exactly, what ethics committee and who, these are things that we should be a bit quicker about. Of course, we can't get away from the fact that if you're developing, medicines, diagnostics, medical devices, these go into patients, and it's really important to have a regulatory framework around them. But we need to be, I think, quicker at assessing these and assessing the needs if we want to develop this ecosystem in Africa.
No, agreed. And to that end, I believe in talking about how do we harness kind of the power of the ecosystem, right? And thinking even towards the future of biotech within Africa. We need to be able to also, I think, harness the power of partnership, and also to not just push through on the regulatory frameworks, as you mentioned, but whether it's the ethical frameworks that we should be leveraging and doing, whether it's the public-private partnerships that we try to ensue. I know we're going to be talking about that a little bit as well during our conversation. But I think part of establishing a very strong ecosystem is going to rely on ensuring that there's more connectivity with a lot more players, having a lot more of these chats, learning about what each other are doing so that there can be that supportive framework in place. And so I actually want to shift the conversation a little bit on that, and start probably with you, Dr. Omar, around how do we actually start to think about scaling, right? Because it's one thing to come in with an idea, to start an initiative, to get that up and running. But when we now think about scale, whether we're talking about scale at the city level, at the regional level, and then now thinking about the Pan-African level, right? We know that the African Free Continental Trade Agreement just recently operationalized. How are you thinking about initiatives, for instance, within your company? And what are the considerations and challenges that you're running up against as you think about this concept of scale and what that means when you think about offering your services regionally?
Thank you. Actually, I'll be sharing our own, let's say, little story here. Till 2018, I didn't have that connection with the rest of Africa, and I had a stereotype that I can never scale my company to other African countries. Maybe I had that geopolitical boundaries that I don't know who created between North Africa and South Africa, to be honest. And then yes, and Sub-Saharan Africa, thank you, exactly. The Sahara, maybe. But then I had the opportunity to participate in 2019 with the Africa Business Heroes competition. We actually ended up winning the competition, coming second position. And I had a very rare opportunity to go to the major African cities. I went to Nairobi, I went to Cape Town, Johannesburg, I went to Accra. Then I realized that scaling is actually super easy if you talk to people. And this would be my insight here to the audience. Just talking to people, talk to your peers, talk to the fellow players in the ecosystem. And then the opportunities were overwhelming. You have to partner with someone from the local community, and then they will just open the door for you. Fast forward 3 years. This year, we're considering opening in Lagos and in Cape Town. And actually, I met Delali through one of these visits. I just booked a ticket, went to Lagos, no agendas. I heard there is a great site there and great team. I went to meet them, met Delali, and then very openly, they told me about the opportunities, about the challenges, about how to come in, how to scale to Nigeria. And this is how actually it works. So what I can confirm is we as Africans, we don't talk to each other a lot. And I thought it's maybe North versus Sub-Saharan, but then I realized even East to West, and it's everywhere. My friends in Accra, they told me we don't even talk a lot to Nigeria, or they're like border countries. Like, wow, we really have to talk to each other a lot. Probably a second experience that confirmed that, where I met Adrian, was a couple of weeks, I guess, in Cairo. There was the Africa Health XCon Summit. We had visitors from Cameroon, from Kenya. And again, they just realized they have a lot of opportunities talking together. So what I can confirm is the following. Although the regulatory frameworks are a little bit different, but the markets are very close. We are suffering from the same problems. And we, as a whole African community, we have a lot of opportunities in what I tend to call grassroots innovation. So it's amazing to compete on the frontiers of science, and we can do that, but we do have a lot of opportunities just below our feet. I know a lot of African successful biotech companies are now producing kits. This is amazing, because if you want to solve the supply chain problems, you need local suppliers of kits. Yes, you did not invent a new medicine, but you are helping others to build on that. So if you look to the whole, like have this holistic vision, we have to build it all the way bottom top. Okay, we need people to work on infrastructure like Nawa. We need some people to work on kits. We need some people to work probably on engineering. I met those amazing scientists from South Africa building machines. This is amazing. Now we don't even have to import spare parts from outside. There's a lot of opportunities. Probably, as Davidson mentioned very nicely, problems and challenges are creating a lot of opportunities in Africa. So there is a lot to do, and I can confirm that scaling is actually much easier than I initially thought. You have to study the similar ecosystems and basically copy your equation and put the local touch to it. This would be my short answer to that question.
Thank you. I think the key takeaway we're hearing from you is open up your mouth, talk. There's no right or wrong. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is about connection, and we cannot do this alone, is what I'm hearing very strongly. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to quickly add to that, Davidson, before I kind of dive into a similar but not so similar topic.
Oh, very quickly, I agree 100% with that. The difference between what you do is what you know. And knowledge is pretty much free these days. You have YouTubes, you have WhatsApps where you can do these international calls for free, et cetera, et cetera. It is really something they excel at in the West. In the US, in Europe, they have conferences all the time. They meet up, they share, they have panels. We're starting to do all this now. This is an example here. They share their experiences, they discuss problems, they come together to confront their governments and to get the legislation they need in place, etc. I don't know, traditionally Africans can be reserved about the little fiefdoms or the knowledge, and they're scared of being copied and all the rest. I can guarantee you there's no chance of that happening if you're working on an innovative project. It's really not worth, it's often not worth a big company's time or whatever to try and replicate it. They'll rather buy you or collaborate with you or something. You'll only get opportunities by sharing and discussing your project with others. You'll only learn and you'll only find opportunities, I believe. Excellent points.
So really quickly, I would love for all panelists to actually touch on this. So, we've talked about the need for having solid infrastructure, more than solid infrastructure, right? We all have a potential role to play in that, and ensuring systems are in place, et cetera. As we now talk about technological innovations, right? Obviously, there are companies that are working on tech innovations, but you can't get away from AI, right? AI is the sexiest buzzword that we all keep hearing, and whether it's AI or some derivative of it within Web3, there's a role potentially that it could be in shaping biotech, whether you're talking about focusing it on medical imaging, for instance, and using AI within medical imaging for diagnostics with a radiologist, or thinking about it within biomedical research services and how it helps to improve drug discovery. Sometimes I think about AI as it's relating to potentially health worker capacity and being able to help with training needs, given the fact that we want to be able to see more professionals within this space. So I'd love to throw the question to every panelist here. When you hear AI, what connects you AI to biotech? Just a few short phrases around that would be helpful. And anybody can feel free to start.
I'll go, because I won't say much. AI, latest buzzword, that's what comes to mind. There of course been some serious AI initiatives. It's one of the, it's one of the areas that's getting a lot of funding in pharma and biotech. A lot of debate around, whether it's actually producing, I think there've been a few examples now of AI-aided drug discovery, at least, and some compounds just entering clinical trials around that. It is definitely a really important area of future development. Whether or not, the discourse around it at the moment, I think we're very far off that. We're very far off. AI is taking over and doing all the work for us. Very, very far away from it. I believe it could happen, but we're quite a while away from that. The other thing, though, is that AI, one of the great advantages maybe for Africa in AI is it is a relatively easy field to get into. You probably need computer equipment, laptop, blah, 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 maybe access to some servers, but you don't have to go through the pain that you will if you're doing a wet lab or an analytical lab like Omar, etc. Right? So there's some natural advantages there where you can leapfrog and we can, you can get our brain power working on that. A great example is InstaDeep, which is a founded by a couple of Tunisians, that has gone global, was acquired this year for $682 million by Biotech, a major biotech company based in Germany. And that $682 million figure is the largest exit of any startup in Africa to date, right? So that's a perfect example of what is possible if you get an AI platform right. You can scale out of Africa. They're headquartered now in the UK, and they're acquired by a major global organization.
Thank you.
I can go next and say we've talked about talent development, access to education. I think with some of these AI tools getting more and more user-friendly, getting mobile on mobile devices, and with the expansion of the internet and mobile devices in Africa, we can get people educated, we can get people catch up with the necessary skills and knowledge, be it in business, be it in science, and whatever topic that you need to learn. Someone was telling me the other day, you can actually give prompts to ChatGPT to explain whatever complex issue as if it were teaching it to a 5-year-old, and it will break it down to you to get to understand it. And he was so excited. This was a student in Uganda, and he was so excited, like, I'm learning all these things thanks to ChatGPT. You don't need to go to Harvard, you don't need to go to University of Cape Town. You can sit somewhere and learn whatever complex issues and just let your creativity flow. You can troubleshoot, you can brainstorm ideas. So I think for me, what AI would do probably is enable talent to really shine in Africa and give us access to knowledge, but also confidence to pursue our ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I guess I have nothing more to add. I would just highlight the point Davidson mentioned, that AI actually brings a lot of opportunities to the African biotech ecosystem, because the cost of innovation in AI-based initiatives is way less than working in a wet lab. I want also to bring an example here from a startup that I was actually mentoring back in days, and now they have done a great success. It's called Proteinia. Watch those guys; they will make waves very, very soon. They basically invented a language model like how ChatGPT is working, but in the field of protein engineering. And their model actually surpassed the one produced by Google on all KPIs. And Google now, I guess, is considering investing in them. And they graduated like 3 years ago. So they're very, very young students. I was teaching them at the university, very smart. But as I told you, AI is bringing to Africa a big, big opportunity that you can really put your innovation into practice at much lower cost than if you want to pursue a hardcore wet lab initiative like we're doing.
Thank you. No, all fantastic examples. And I'll throw it over back to Adrian. I will note we are going to have time for questions. So I would encourage, if you do have any, please do put them in the chat, so we will get to them a little bit later.
Actually, Delali, I think we can start with them now. There's already a question in the chat for Dr. Sakra. Dr. Sakra, how did you get the funding needed to start your business?
Sure. So we raised money from angels and VCs, so it's called venture capital money. And to do so, you need to understand how this venture capital investment goes on. You need to build a model that is very scalable, something that can go like 300%, 400% growth year over year. Typically, what does this type of fast growth are internet-based ventures or internet-enabled ventures, agri-tech, fintech, something that is quickly repeatable, quickly scalable, and the venture money can flow into that type of ventures. So what we focused on very early when we started Nawa is to grow at this rate. And then we went to the venture capitalists, the VCs, and told them, you know what? We have built a science-based venture that can actually grow as quickly as other edutech, fintech, green, okay, nothing like fintech, but edutech and agri-tech ventures, okay? In the beginning, we had an absolutely 100% no, till we started getting our numbers on the stage, showing them year over year for at least the very first 2 years, that at least with very small investment, we had one lab. We started with a nanotechnology lab doing services for the university that we are actually doubling month over month. And by the end of the year, we have grown like 350%. So some early stage investors stepped in, put some little tickets, little investments, and we could show on the next year and the year after and the year after that we're actually still growing at this level. Now we're 8 years old, but still last year we have grown 260%. So the company grown more than a double in 1 year. We're also expecting another double in size and in sales and top line this year. And this is how you attract money from VCs. What I can also add here is there are other ways that you can do so. If you can think of, let's say, a business model that will bring money very early on, something that will not need a long way for innovation, you can get funds from the banks. You can get from some initiatives like Bill and Melinda Gates. They're funding a lot of startups across Africa. There are some very decent business angel investors funding these initiatives and those early stage companies. So now it's much easier than when we started, and I do encourage you to explore different opportunities that are now around for funding. Probably one thing, Adrian, you can share, we have met this amazing biotech incubator in Kenya that is open for everyone across Africa from Robert, and they have an open call. I don't know if we can bring the link. I don't have it actually in hand. Maybe you can share it through the page of BioAfrica below in the description. So there is an open call for very young African biotech entrepreneurs to join. So this is one thing you can do.
Yes, Omar, it's Vilgro, so VILLGRO Africa, and you can always reach out to the team, and we would be able to connect you. I'm also aware that the Africa CDC is also putting together some funding schemes for early stage entrepreneurs in the health sector. So also be on the lookout for that. So we have a second question. How can a biotech scientist in the diaspora connect to work with companies in Africa? So I don't know if maybe Dr. Ate, do you want to try on that one?
Sure. So one easy way could be networking. So sort of programs like this, getting some names down and finding out who does what. One of the easy ways, there are a few, for example, specialists, healthcare VC funds in Africa. You already mentioned one with Vilgro. There's HealthCap in Lagos, Jazza Rift in Nairobi as well. Savant is a deep tech investor, but they're based in South Africa, and they've done a lot of startup companies in the health area. So you could look through their portfolios, and you can see, if you go to these African VC websites, you can see what companies they're funding. And from there, if a company matches your expertise or you can contribute in some way, why not get the company's contact, from the website or whatever. It's always best if you can do, networking, so you can actually get a hot name rather than a cold email. But especially if you're a missing piece in sort of their expertise landscape, I'm sure they will welcome those approaches.
Yes, and the question is very much relevant to why we are doing this dialogue with African biotech leaders. Again, just to insist, it's not about Africans only on the continent. It's about bringing together Africans in Africa and beyond. So please join the LinkedIn page. I think that's a good place to start. And then we will be launching a platform where we will be collecting, all data and having everything available and accessible on a single landing sort of domain. And so we will be launching that and communicating more details as we go ahead.
Adrienne, could I just add?
Yes.
As well, there are a few accelerator programs on the continent.
Yes.
Like I just saw recently, Future Africa has got a platform called Accelerate Africa. And although it's open to a lot of tech companies, there will be a few health tech companies in there. There are tech stars on the continent, YC Combinator, all these type of things. They're also good plays. So for example, if you go to YC Combinator, or Y Combinator, YC, you will see that they actually, segregate out where all the startups are from. So you'll have a list of African startups and what space they're in, healthcare, etc. But often these accelerators need mentors. So if you're really well experienced, working in the diaspora, you'd be highly welcomed to those type of programs.
That's a great insight, because that's a good place to start to get involved, right, as a mentor. So I think we have just about 4 minutes to go, and I'll just ask our dear panelists for your last thoughts and key takeaways from this conversation before we call it. Anyone can start.
Probably I will go first.
Okay.
Maybe
1 minute.
Even less than that. Take the plane, go to other countries, talk to your fellow scientists. Opportunities are there. Africa is full of opportunities. We just need to communicate more. So communication and networking would be my final message for today.
And as we're a bit short on time, I'll also stick to one point. I think the most important thing for me is, having interacted with Africa throughout the last 20 years in sort of this space, is to shift the conversation away from all these initiatives around, malaria, infectious diseases, TB, HIV. They're all very important. But as Africans, innovation is unpredictable by its very nature. You could be sitting in Kigali and have a brilliant idea for ovarian cancer, which mainly affects, middle-aged white women. So what? You should be able to do that company in Kigali and export that, right? So if you think of China, South Korea, all these countries that have emerged, they were not manufacturing for their markets, they were manufacturing for the world. And we need to start thinking that way in Africa. So we shouldn't be scared about, opening a biotech manufacturing plant. Even if we don't have the local market, we can export it. Right, and we can generate income that will rise our economy, rise average wages, etc., to the point where we could eventually afford those things. So that's the one thought I'll leave everyone with.
And maybe one last word from Mrs. Atepo.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the points that have been mentioned. I would just say, to stick with the one point quickly, is remain connected, get connected, do what you need to do to plug in. As somebody who's sat in the diaspora, as somebody who's lived within the continent, just continue to pursue, because I believe that the more people we can get plugged in, the more we'll be able to see the dividends around the sorts of things that will be impactful, not just within the continent, but globally impactful. And so for those curious or wondering, just take the first step. There's no right or wrong. I think this has been a great forum to be able to do that. But it's one way to do it, right? So tap into whoever you feel, try the cold emails, they may or may not work, as mentioned, but it's a step. So that's what I would just encourage.
Thank you all for your really insightful comments, thoughts, experiences shared. I think this has really been valuable. Thank you to the audience for being so engaging and patient. We will now call it for this episode. Be on the lookout. We will have another episode in the month of August. And I can already announce that it will be an all-female panel. So you want to be on the lookout for that, for African women that are leaders in biotech. I don't have the names to share with you right now, but they are confirmed. So stay on the lookout, join the LinkedIn page, connect, you know, these are your connection points. Dr. Sekar, Mrs. Atipo, Dr. Ate, myself, you can already start there. BioAfrica, please also, we have BioAfrica convention coming up first week of September. You want to connect? That's where you connect, okay? Because everyone doing biotech, everyone relevant to the biotech ecosystem in Africa will be attending. So start there, okay? Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. Bye-bye.
Bye.